On a bitterly cold day in January 1988, in the small town of Kincardine, Ontario, Julie Bowers and her sons, 2-year-old Ben and 11-month-old Dustin, affectionately known as Dusty, were headed into town. Tragically, Julie would be returning home without her baby. He would later be found frozen and snow-covered amongst the trees. It has been almost 40 years since the death of baby Dusty, his parents now separated, his brother now grown. Yet this case still has so many unanswered questions. But most importantly, who left baby Dusty to die? On this episode of The Dark Side of My Room, we are diving into the heartbreaking case of baby Dusty Bowers. Kincardine, Ontario, a small town tucked along the icy shores of Lake Huron. Quiet, tight-knit, and the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. Back then, life was simple. Mornings started with coffee at the diner, evenings ended with the 6 o'clock news, and the idea of real danger, real evil, felt far away. The winters in Kincardine were brutal. Long stretches of gray skies and biting wind that rolled off the lake. The townsfolk worked at the Bruce plant, in the mills, or ran small family shops on Queen Street. It was a place built on trust and familiarity. So when tragedy struck here, it didn't just ripple through a family. It tore through the heart of the town. Whispers spread faster than the wind off the lake. Doors that were once left unlocked stayed closed, because in a town this small, when something terrible happens, everyone feels it. Julie Bowers was 24 and living with her 39-year-old husband John in a modest apartment on the south side of Kincardine. John managed a local gas bar, and together they were raising their 2 young children. That day, Julie had set out to run errands with her boys, a stop at the donut shop, and a trip to the bank. She bundled up 2-year-old Ben in the front seat and 11-month-old Dusty in the back. As they drove downtown, she noticed Dusty's tiny eyelids growing heavy. Not wanting to drag a restless baby into the bank, she made a split-second decision, one that seemed innocent at the time. She would take a short drive, let him sleep in the car while she ran into the bank. A decision that would forever change their lives, one that seemed innocent at the time. Confident that Dusty was sound asleep, she and Ben stepped inside the Royal Bank of Canada, unaware that this brief absence would become a moment that shattered her family forever and shook the entire town to its core. What happened next would turn Kincardine's quiet streets into the scene of a mystery that no one can forget. Julie and Ben had been about 5 minutes in the bank. Ben got a balloon for himself and one for his baby brother waiting for them in the car. But panic surged through Julie as she returned to the car. Looking into the back seat, she realized Dusty was gone. Frantic, she stumbled into a nearby convenience store just before 1 p.m. to call the police. Her distress was so overwhelming that she had to be sedated at the scene. The next morning, Julie returned to the police station to check for updates. It was there that her sister-in-law, Helen Sears, urged her to tell the officers about a dream she had the night before. Julie described it vividly. "I saw the place. I recognized the place." She spoke of Dusty lying alone and of bare trees and bushes surrounding him in the snow. The officers listened skeptically, but offered to drive her around the country roads, hoping to jog her memory. According to Constable Dave Quinn, Julie suggested they go just outside of town. Julie claims this is because the search was being focused mainly on the downtown core. They drove slowly down the main road, passing 9 side streets. Before Julie asked them to turn back, and checked the road they had just passed. About 160 meters down the road, Ryan noticed footprints in the snow. The cruiser pulled over and they all stepped out. Julie saw the prints and followed them with her eyes into the wooded area. And there, in the distance, she spotted something blue. At first, the officers couldn't see anything. As they cautiously approached, the outline became unmistakable. Dusty, his tiny body lying in the snow. His blue snowsuit stark against the white landscape. His little blue winter hat had fallen over his eyes, and frozen tears streaked his chubby cheeks. Julie's grief was immediate and all-consuming. The mother who had set out on an ordinary day was now engulfed in unimaginable loss. They placed Julie in the back of the police car as one of the officers carefully moved baby Dusty onto a blanket by the side of the road. The coroner soon arrived at the scene and officially pronounced Dusty Bowers dead. He was just 11 days away from celebrating his first birthday. The pathologist later determined that Dusty had died from exposure. He had frozen to death. 24-year-old Julie Bowers was charged with first-degree murder, but by August of 1988, the charge was reduced to second-degree murder. Her trial would not begin until 2 years later. On January 17, 1990, the prosecution laid out a clear and chilling argument. Julie had led police to Dusty because she already knew where he was. According to them, she had abandoned her son there herself. How else, they argued, could she have guided officers directly to his body? They dismissed her account of a dream, revealing the location as impossible. The defense, however, presented a different story. They argued that Julie's discovery could be explained without her being involved in Dusty's death. A psychiatrist specializing in dreams testified that her vision was neither supernatural nor suspicious, but rather a natural expression of a grieving mother's subconscious. An important function of many dreams, he explained, is problem-solving. In this case, Mrs. Bowers' problem was a missing baby. He also noted that Julie had been sedated at the time, and that the medication might have influenced the vividness of her dream. The doctor pointed out that Kincardine was a small town with only a few wooded areas. Julie may have simply chosen the right one. Perhaps, he said, she unconsciously noticed footprints in the snow, something that caught her attention without her realizing it, leading her to stop and look into the brush. Ultimately, he concluded, Julie had a hunch, and she was lucky. Her lawyer agreed, comparing it to winning the lottery. The chances are incredibly small, but someone always wins. In this case, instead of winning money, Julie led police to her 11-month-old son. Julie Bowers took the stand in her own defense. She testified that things did not happen the way police claimed. She explained she hadn't thought her dream was important. She only shared it with officers because her sister-in-law, Helen Sears, had urged her to. Julie said she was growing frustrated with the police because their search efforts had focused only on the downtown area. Desperate for progress, she agreed to go out driving with them herself. When they left the police station, the officer behind the wheel asked which direction she wanted to go, left or right. Julie said she chose to go right. They drove down several side roads, not directly to the one where Dusty was eventually found. On that particular road, the officer stopped the car and got out. Julie said that she and the other officer followed him, and then she saw the flash of blue. It was Dusty's snowsuit. She began to scream. Julie's lawyer argued there were 3 key reasons she could not have committed the murder. First, witnesses saw Julie leaving the local donut shop, where she was a regular, at 12:45 p.m. She had both of her sons with her at that time. 10 minutes later, she arrived at the bank. Police later ran a time test, driving from the donut shop to the remote area where Dusty was found, and then to the bank. The trip took nearly 17 minutes. Far too long for Julie to have abandoned her son. and make it to the bank by 12:55 p.m. After Julie reported Dusty missing just after 1 p.m., she was never alone again. From that moment forward, she was constantly surrounded by police officers or family members. Second, the spot where Dusty was found was along a gravel road with only one entrance and one exit. A resident who lived nearby was outside between 12:35 and 1 p.m. and did not see a single car pass by. Finally, the defense argued that it was scientifically impossible for Julie to have abandoned Dusty before reporting him missing. To prove it, they brought Dr. Janice Ophoven in, a forensic pathologist and an expert on child hypothermia from Minnesota. The doctor testified that if Dusty had been left in the snowbank before 1 p.m., as the prosecution alleged, his body would have been completely frozen when discovered 26 hours later. But Dusty wasn't frozen. Not even his tissue or organs showed damage from the cold. Then came one of the most heartbreaking revelations of the entire trial. The doctor stated that she believed Dusty had still been alive when he was found, barely clinging to life. But no one performed any life-saving measures. Instead, he was left lying by the side of the road for another 3 hours, before being placed in a body bag and taken to a hospital 3 hours away. In her expert opinion, she said she believed Dusty likely died inside that body bag. The officer who found him later testified that he had seen enough dead bodies to know Dusty was no longer alive, and the coroner at the scene pronounced him dead immediately. But the doctor insisted both had failed to follow proper hypothermia protocol. Dusty should have been warmed and resuscitation efforts made before declaring death. She testified that, without a doubt, Dusty had been placed in the snowbank after Julie reported him missing, likely sometime between 10 p.m. and midnight, more than 9 hours later. The prosecution tried to discredit her, as lawyers often do, by suggesting she was a hired gun testifying for money. But their argument quickly fell apart. This doctor had a sterling reputation and was rarely called by the defense. In fact, she had testified for the prosecution in most of her previous cases. Another hypothermia expert agreed with her timeline. However, a third expert, Dr. Charles Smith, one of Canada's most respected child pathologists at Toronto's Hospital for Sick Children, disagreed. He claimed Dusty had likely been abandoned around noon, roughly an hour before Julie reported him missing. Smith admitted that determining time of death wasn't an exact science and often came down to educated guesses. Julie's defense countered that Dr. Smith's findings were unreliable. He had failed to record key temperature measurements during the autopsy, and before trial, he had given two completely different timelines for when Dusty might have been left. One around 7 p.m. and another around 4 a.m. But when it came time for trial, his new estimates suddenly aligned perfectly with the police's version of events. There was also other compelling evidence that suggested Julie Bowers did not kill her son. A witness came forward saying they saw a man carrying a baby walk from the bank's parking lot to a car parked in an alley around the same time Dusty was believed to have gone missing. The man was never identified, and it remains unknown whether he was involved in the kidnapping or not. The defense emphasized that there was no motive. Dusty was a healthy, well-cared-for baby, not abused or neglected. Julie had no reason to harm her child. Her lawyer questioned the prosecution's logic. Why would Julie stop for coffee at the donut shop, rush out of town, abandon her son in the cold, then calmly return to the bank and invent a kidnapping story? None of it made sense. Even more importantly, there was no physical evidence linking Julie to Dusty's death. Her lawyer argued that police had developed tunnel vision, focusing only on Julie and overlooking crucial leads. For example, 5 distinct footprints were found in the snow near where Dusty's body was discovered. Investigators never examined them. Those prints could have revealed key details, such as the kidnapper's shoe size, weight, or even height based on the stride. They also could have been matched to a specific pair of boots or shoes. There were other investigative failures, too. Police didn't dust Julie's car for fingerprints until hours after Dusty's disappearance. By then, the vehicle had been sitting exposed in the cold parking lot, and any prints were long gone. Dusty's clothing and snowsuit were also never sent for forensic testing, a missed opportunity that might have revealed fibers, DNA, or other critical evidence. The defense even presented alternative suspects, members of Julie's own family. Her twin brother, John Sears, his wife Helen, and their brother Alan Sears all came under scrutiny. There were conflicting accounts of John's whereabouts on the day Dusty disappeared. John claimed he had lunch at their sister Lynn Bosch's house and left sometime between 1 and 1:30 p.m. But Lynn told investigators her brother didn't stay for lunch and had actually left shortly before noon. If Lynn was telling the truth, John had no alibi during the critical window when Dusty vanished. Even stranger, John's movements after leaving Lynn's house placed him in the area of the kidnapping. Normally, he would have taken a route that bypassed the bank entirely. But that day, he said he took the long way home, driving right past the parking lot where Dusty disappeared. When questioned about this unusual detour, John told police he had a gut feeling that someone in his family was in trouble. Then, hours after the kidnapping, John, Helen, and Alan all met at the local hospital, even though none of them had any reason to be there. John later claimed he'd heard Julie was at the hospital and went to check on her. But Julie's lawyer suggested something more sinister, that they had gathered to discuss what to do with the baby. It's worth noting that it was Helen Sears who urged Julie to tell police about her dream. The very dream that led to Dusty's discovery, and ultimately to Julie's arrest. 2 pathologists testified that Dusty had been placed in the snowbank sometime between 10 p.m. and midnight, hours after Julie reported him missing. If that was true, it meant Julie could not have been responsible, because from the moment she called police, every minute of her time was accounted for. Although suspicion had begun to shift toward other members of Julie's family, there were still unanswered questions, especially about Helen Sears. Helen couldn't account for all of her time that night. Earlier that evening, she had been at the Bowers apartment, but around 10 p.m., she left for about an hour. She told investigators she went to the hospital to get sleeping pills, yet there were no hospital records showing that she received any. And 2 nurses working that night said they didn't remember seeing her there at all. But that raised a haunting question. Why would John and Helen have kidnapped their nephew and leave him to die in the snow? The defense had a theory. In the past, John and Helen had criticized Julie for leaving her children unattended in the car. The defense suggested that John, while driving home from his sister Lynn's house that day, may have seen Julie's car parked outside the bank and noticed the baby alone inside. Or perhaps he saw her take only Ben into the bank. Whatever the case, the defense believed John took Dusty, not to harm him, but to teach Julie a lesson. They argued that John probably intended to return the baby, but things escalated after Julie called the police. Just 4 minutes after her 911 call, roadblocks were set up all over town. John may have panicked, realizing that what began as a misguided prank could now be seen as a kidnapping. According to the defense's theory, they decided to hide the baby. One of John's friends owned a vacant cottage nearby, and the defense believed they brought Dusty there. Later that night, around 10 p.m., Helen left Julie's apartment, claiming she was going to the hospital, but instead, the defense argued, she went to the cottage. From there, she either abandoned Dusty in the woods herself or handed him off to someone who did. Both John and Alan testified at the trial, denying any involvement in Dusty's kidnapping or death. But on the stand, Alan admitted that when he first heard Dusty had been taken, his immediate thought was that John or one of Julie's friends had done it to teach her a lesson. There was also another witness, a horse trainer who testified that at around 4 a.m., just hours before Dusty was found, he saw a car parked about 2.5 miles from the discovery site. The car looked just like John's, and inside he saw 2 people. In the back seat, there appeared to be a pile of clothing. Julie Bauer's trial lasted 9.5 weeks. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning their verdict: not guilty. Julie was acquitted of all charges. Members of the jury hugged her afterward, and several stayed in contact with her long after the trial. But the town of Kincardine was deeply divided. Some believed Julie had been wrongly accused. Others believed she had gotten away with murder. Julie stayed in Kincardine for a short time after the trial, but the scrutiny became unbearable. She eventually left town, her whereabouts unknown. Police conducted a 5-month review of the case, since it remained officially unsolved. Their conclusion: members of Julie's family had both the opportunity and means to have committed the crime. But despite this, investigators decided not to pursue the case further, and it was formally closed. Many in Kincardine believed the case was dropped simply because police still thought Julie was guilty, that she had somehow fooled everyone and walked free. Even Constable Dave Quinn, the officer who accompanied her the day Dusty's body was found, continued to believe she had killed her son. Years later, the case took on another disturbing twist. 2 of the 3 pathologists who testified at trial agreed that Dusty had been abandoned between 10 p.m. and midnight. The only one who didn't was Dr. Charles Smith, the same doctor whose testimony aligned perfectly with the prosecution's theory. Before the trial, Dr. Smith had estimated that Dusty was abandoned at either 7 p.m. or 4 a.m. But during the trial, his timeline mysteriously changed to match the police narrative exactly. Dr. Smith had been one of Canada's most respected child pathologists, but over time, questions began to mount about his credibility. He was later accused of altering reports to fit police and prosecution theories. In 2003, he was ordered to stop performing autopsies. In 2005, a formal inquiry reviewed 45 of his cases and found that in 20 of them, his findings were questionable. 5 people had been wrongfully convicted of murdering children based on his flawed testimony. By February 2011, Dr. Smith was stripped of his medical license. In 2019, the Canadian news program W5 revisited the case of Dusty Bowers. Decades later, the town of Kincardine was still divided. Many locals continued to believe Julie had killed her son and gotten away with it, arguing that no innocent person could have led police directly to the body. But even the prosecutor from the original trial wasn't sure anymore. He told W5 that the case still haunted him, that he couldn't shake the feeling he might have come close to putting an innocent woman behind bars. When a journalist from W5 asked the Ontario Provincial Police if the case would ever be solved, a spokesperson confirmed it had been reopened and that they were once again looking for witnesses. Yet 6 years later, no arrests have been made. They'll have to live with what they did, she said. W5 reached out to John, Helen, and Alan Sears for comment. John and Helen had divorced after the trial. Helen didn't respond. Alan replied only with, "Sorry, not interested." John wrote back just one chilling line: "She got away with murder." Today, the murder of 11-month-old Dusty Bowers remains unsolved. In May 2025, Alan Sears passed away after a 4-year battle with cancer. His obituary listed that he was survived by his brother John and sister Lynn, but made no mention of Julie at all. After almost 40 years, the question still remains: who left baby Dusty in the snow? Thank you for watching. Please subscribe for more deep dives into cold case mysteries, and share this video to help bring attention where it's long overdue. If you have any information about the murder of baby Dusty Bowers, please call the OPP tip line at 1-888-310-1122 or Crime Stoppers at 800-222-8477. Thank you for joining me for this episode of The Dark Side of My Room.